Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Pompeii. Pompeii is such a sad tale. As many of you are likely to know from history class, Pompeii was an ancient city near modern-day Naples in the Campania region of Italy. The issue with Pompeii that it was built at the base of Mount Vesuvius, a volcano that spilled her fury in 79 AD. The city had been in existence for thousands of years before the eruption, and by the time of its demise, it was a thriving Roman hub. The eruption covered Pompeii in 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash, burying the city but largely preserving a snapshot of Roman life. The lost city of Pompeii was rediscovered over a millennium and a half later and was excavated in the late 1800s. These days, more and more of the city is being uncovered under the ash and pumice. The area draws in 2.5 million tourists now each year who delight in the macabre history of the Roman town. Indeed, it is possible to see ash-covered corpses of bodies nearly 2,000 years old. Coming in at number 9, gone overnight, we have Chaohu. With a simple flick of an administrative wrist, the Chinese city of Chaohu disappeared overnight, which is pretty worrying. Can China just cancel cities these days? It seems so. Chaohu was a city of 4 million people and was known for housing a Han Dynasty tomb and a large freshwater lake. It seems that the Chinese government is pretty obsessed with economic statuses and statistics, and the reason that the city was effectively deleted was to adjust its borders, giving land to nearby cities to make them seem more profitable, which actually sounds kinda crazy, right? The worrying thing is though, is that there was absolutely no public consultation or official notice, and residents were only aware when they were told that they were living in new parts of old cities. So I live in Toronto, like I said, and I guess it's like waking up in Toronto and it no longer being a thing, and I'm told like, oh, you live in East Niagara now. I guess not a lot would change, but at the same time, everything would change. Weird. So weird. Okay, pinnacle of weird at number 8, we have Taured. Where is Taured? Is it a place or does it exist beyond our universe? We have talked a little bit about the man from Taured on Most Amazing a few times, but now I want to talk more about the country itself. But first, let me recap. In 1954, a man was detained at the Japanese border in Haneda. This is in Japan, and he arrived on a plane from Europe. The man was affronted at the border control officer's questions. He claimed that he was on his third business trip to Japan that year. When he was searched, he had a wallet filled with a mixture of currencies, seeming to verify his business traveler status. When he presented his passport, officials were absolutely baffled. They'd never seen a passport like this before. Asking where he was from, the man, who primarily spoke French, said he was from Taured. I'm sorry, where? Officers were absolutely baffled because, as you probably know, there is no such place. When he was asked to point to it on a map, he pointed somewhere in the locale of Andorra today. He then became confused and agitated that the map he was given didn't actually include Taured. So, was it real? Did it disappear, or did he appear from another dimension? His passport looked legitimate, but he was from the mysterious country. His passport even had stamps in it, legitimate stamps, that seemed to actually cooperate with his story. He was also carrying a checkbook to a non-existent bank branch from Taured. So I guess my question is, even if the passport and checkbook were convincing fakes, how on earth would he even have been able to get on the plane in the first place? Passports are checked at multiple times when you go to an airport, including at check-in and before you're allowed to even board. I for one have like a deep feeling that Taured is real, but where did it go? Once again I ask, is it in another dimension? Because I don't know, I think that. Speaking of other dimensions, this is crazy at number 7, we have the Cloud City. This terrifying city in the sky appeared and disappeared within the space of a day. Chinese media went wild when thousands of residents who live in 2 different cities in the country spotted what looked like a huge floating city in the sky. Have a look and tell me what you think, like what on earth could that even be? The phenomenon was described as being a ghost city by onlookers who saw skyscrapers in the clouds. To me, I'm thinking this is another sign of a parallel universe or something. The phenomenon occurred in both Guangdong and Jiangxi, with some believing it was an alien city. The images were caught on camera for the world to see, so I have to say, what on earth or above earth is going on? Even though it looks like a city in the clouds to you and me, apparently apparently it's an optical illusion called Fata Morgana, which is a natural mirage. That being said, hundreds of people saw this disappearing cloud city, which to me makes me think that actually there might be more to it than simple mirage. A reappearing city up next, we have Villa Epicuen. Oh my goodness, wait until you see pictures from Villa Epicuen. Villa Epicuen was a tourist resort near Buenos Aires in Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, meaning the whole town had to be abandoned. Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuen became a sunken town, lost to the perilous tides. However, strangely, the waters began to recede again in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky-looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the banks, but honestly, it actually looks kinda cool in like a ghostly, scary way. Coming in at number 5, we have Angikuni Lake. This is a spooky Canadian urban legend set in the frozen north of Nunavut, one of Canada's largest and yet least populated territories. The conditions in the Arctic land are pretty terrifying at the best of times. The story goes that in the year 1930, a fur trapper, Joe LaBelle, needed to take shelter from a storm, so he decided to trek to a close-by Inuit village that he said he knew well. He'd been a few times in the past and called out a greeting ahead of his arrival, which was weirdly met with no response. When he arrived in the village, he found that its entire population had vanished. Stranger still, it appeared that inside the houses, food was still kept in stocks, and there were even some half-eaten meals on tables. It was as if everyone had fled at a moment's notice. LaBelle reported the incident to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, after months of investigation, they never found much of a trace of the residents. These days, the village can't be found at all, which has led many people to think that it simply never existed. Coming into number 4, we have Ashley. The story goes that in August 1952, the small town of Ashley in Kansas, USA, disappeared following a magnitude 7.9 on the Richter scale earthquake. The earthquake was said to have taken place at 3:28 AM, meaning the town's 679 residents were all in bed. The epicenter of the earthquake was none other than Ashley Town Center. Now, the urban legend says that when state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning crack in the earth measuring 100 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. Back in the day when we did things in yards. The depth of the hole was never determined. Many people think that the story of the disappeared town is none other than a creepypasta. Others say that there was indeed an earthquake on record in Kansas and that the town was lost, being too small to be on any maps in the first place. Honestly, I'm not sure. Coming into number 3, we have the story of Rio Verde. This is a Brazilian ghost story. Or are the legends of the disappearance of Rio Verde real? The story goes that in 1923, a group of explorers came by the village of Rio Verde in the Brazilian jungle, supposedly a town of just 600 people. It seems that the explorers were shocked to find the town utterly deserted. They looked in houses and found things in a state of sudden disarray, chairs knocked over, food still on tables, clothes still in cupboards, cars still in driveways. According to the story, police were called to the town and they found a cryptic clue. It seems that one of the townsfolk had left behind a gun that, on examination, seemed to have recently been fired. Aside the gun, there was a mysterious message that read, "There is no salvation." Some people think that the town was abandoned in order to avoid conflict with guerrilla militias, which were a problem at the time. Others think that the disappearance had something to do with religion. To this day, nobody knows. Coming into number 2, we have the crazy story of the town on fire. Did you know that there is a legitimate abandoned town in Pennsylvania that is not only empty, but has been on fire for decades? Centralia was a thriving mining town in Columbia County with a population of a few thousand. These days, just 7 remain, clinging on to their doomed homes. It seems that all was well in Centralia for a very long time. It had been an active mine since the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, since 1962, it has been burning from the inside. It is suspected that the fire started from deliberate trash burning and could well keep burning for a further 250 years, which is absolutely insane. The residents first noticed the fire when smoke began billowing from the ground, accompanied by a foul smell of burning trash. Not only that, carbon monoxide was detected seeping from the ground. With temperatures hotter than the planet Mercury, it was decided that it was too dangerous to even try putting out the flames, and as a result, the town was evacuated slowly. But many people remained living there until 1981. That was when a 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole that suddenly opened up in his backyard. He survived by clinging onto a tree root, but from the hole came a plume of hot steam found to contain poisonous gas. That was it for the rest of the town. These days the town is deserted save from 7 people who just won't leave, but once again, that fire still burns. Okay, are you ready for the saddest story that you'll hear today? Coming into number 1, we have Ordor-sur-Glane. This town was eradicated in one day at the merciless hands of the Nazis. During the German invasion of France in the Second World War, the village of Ordor-sur-Glane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10, 1944, SS soldiers destroyed the village, killing 642 of its inhabitants. There was one sole survivor of the attack and 20 escapees. Now the SS invaded and rounded up men and shot them at point blank range in the barn, which actually may have been a better fate than that awarded to the women and children. They were rounded up into a church that was then set on fire by the German soldiers. You can imagine how that ended. Former French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the town remain untouched as a memorial to those who lost their lives there. Cars lay in ruins, buildings are crumbling, and shops contain what was left of their stocks after the village was ransacked. Tourists can now visit the town remains and nearby memorial centre. I'd actually love to go and pay my respects. It sounds creepy, but honestly historically really cool. I'd better watch out though, because the ransacked town is said to be haunted, and of course it is.
Starting off our list, and at number 10, we have Pripyat, Ukraine, which was the city most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, an infamous incident that released a massive amount of radiation out into the world. The accident forced entire towns to abruptly empty out, and the area within a 19-mile radius of the plant was deemed uninhabitable for at least another 180 years. Absolutely insane. There are a ton of spooky photo ops, but the most famous is the decaying amusement parks. I mean, talk about creepy. How to visit the Chernobyl region is about 2 hours away, and tours range from private visits to multi-day itineraries. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure one day is enough for my itinerary. I don't need an itinerary because I'll remember what I'm doing and it's only lasting one day. At number 9, we have Kennecott, Alaska. Nearly 200 million worth of copper was processed in Kennecott, a self-contained mining town located in Wrangell Street, Ellis National Park, from 1911 to 1938. Well, according to the National Park Services, as these stories usually go, the residents cleared out once the copper resources started to dwindle, and most of the buildings now have been abandoned for over 60 years. Well, there is hope on the horizon. However, the NPS acquired many of the Kennecott's buildings and lands in 1998 and hope to restore some of the buildings like the post office and the general store for modern use. Well, do you want to see a cool and creepy photo? Well, our pick would be empty skating rinks, you guys are seeing an empty tennis court, or how about visit the NPS run visitor center, which is open from Memorial Day through Labor Day, where you can actually pick up brochures or arrange a guided tour with the park ranger. Kennecott's recreational hall, which is fully restored in 2004, which is also available to rent for events. Next up, number 8, Bodie, California. Now this is one old west ghost town you're looking for. Once home to 10,000 people, Bodie boomed in the late 1880s after gold was found in the hills surrounding Mono Lake. Not long after though, Bodie transitioned into a period of steady decline until reaching ghost status around 1915, according to California Department of Parks and Recreation records. So why is this city such in great shape today? Well, you could thank the state of California for adopting the town and turning it into a state historic park in 1962. Coming in number 7 on this list, Waiuta, South Island, New Zealand. In the early 1900s, miners built a town right on top of a whole lot of gold-bearing quartz rocks, which would go on to produce 750,000 ounces of gold from 1.5 million tons of quartz. I'm kind of seeing a theme here where gold is creating immense popularity and wealth before destroying the very places it was found. People mine the gold, and then when it's all done, they get the heck out of there, leaving the town abandoned. Well, by the 1930s, the town had its own hospital, police station, and post office, plus a population of 600. The isolated city thrived until the main mining shaft collapsed, and that was back in 1951, forcing residents to abandon their town. Today, the Department of Conservation works to preserve the remaining buildings and hiking trails around the site. The department even converted one of the buildings, the Waiita Lodge, into a 30-bunk facility for school groups and campers needing overnight accommodations. It is said that the original signpost pointing to a mining industry that no longer exists make for a great photo. Folks venture westward from Reefton on State Highway 7 and keep following the signs for Waiita onto an unpaved road until you reach the spooky destination. You can explore on your own using the unmarked trails or a book tour in advance through friends. I don't know what friends would escort you through a haunted town, but it doesn't sound like great ones. I think you need to lose them. Number 6, we're bringing you Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Warning, this is quite a dark story. On June 10th, 1944, German troops raided the village of Oradour-sur-Glane and murdered 642 men, women, and children. Is this real life right now? Well, National Geographic reports, after the massacre, the military set fire to the churches, barns, and homes, leaving behind only a few surviving residents. The village has remained untouched since the horrific accident, serving as a shrine to those who died that June day. Number 5, we got Pyramidion Svalbard, Norway. The archipelago of Svalbard, located between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to about 2,145 humans. Not a lot. 1,000 polar bears and one seriously bone-chilling ghost town, Pyramidion, named for the pyramid-shaped mountain looming nearby. Pyramidion came to prominence in the 1930s, when the Soviets took ownership of the area's coal fields and quickly began mining operations. After World War II, they started spending more money on the enterprise, building hospitals, cafeterias, and houses, all in the block-style fashion typical of the Soviet-era architecture. The biggest hit came in 1996 when an airplane flying from Moscow to Svalbard crashes en route, killing all 141 passengers on board, many of them Pyramidion residents. The tragedy slashed the morale, and it was fully abandoned in 1998. As for the site today, Rachel Newer of Smithsonian Magazine sums it up perfectly. It was as if several hundred people had abruptly stopped what they were doing and simply walked away. At number 4, we have Tamestown, Shanghai, China. China is a big fan of replica cities. In fact, Shanghai has 7 European-themed towns built to give wealthy residents a new place to call home. There's a Dutch-inspired canal-lined neighborhood, a Paris replica completed with a 300-foot Eiffel Tower, and even a slice of Sweden-inspired churches and Nordic houses included. But we're particularly fans of the Thames town. A British copycat just 40 minutes from downtown Shanghai. Here you'll find a scale replica of the Christ Church, statue of Shakespeare and Winston Churchill, and even some familiar red telephone booths scattered here and there. As curiously cute as this mini city sounds on paper, well, it ended up being a complete failure. In fact, all of the 7 experimental towns are now pretty much abandoned. Well, how do you visit? Well, travelers are more than welcome to walk the cobblestone streets of all 7 replica cities. To get to the Tamestown, they recommend taking the Shanghai Metro 9 to the Songjing Xingxing station, and because I'm pronouncing those words absolutely correct, you guys won't get lost. And then, if you make it to the station that I just said, you can take a taxi for the rest of the way. Only about 2.5 miles away and about $2 USD. Finally down, and at number 3, for abandoned towns you shouldn't visit, we're talking about the Great Salt Tower, Utah. And if you find yourself in Salt Lake City, Utah, you'll probably hear about the Great Salt Lake, or the Dead Sea of America, where you can float on the water. Now, I must tell you that you'll encounter corpses of dead seagulls, swarming flies, and a putrid odor. If you take the plunge, there's no way to miss the Saltire, a huge building with Moorish domes that you can see at the same time when you can smell the stench. The saltire that you see now is actually the third one. The first one was built in 1893 in order to provide a safe venue for recreation for families. It became immensely popular with all kinds of events until its pavilion and few other buildings were ravaged by the fire in 1925. Although it was built a second time, it never achieved the same popularity. In a period marked by the Great Depression, World War II, and several mishaps, it finally got destroyed in an arson fire in 1970. The third one was built in 1981, approximately a mile away from the original venue. But you kind of take away the whole history of it, so I can see why it never became as popular. Now, number 2 on this list, we have Silver City, Idaho, which was at one point one of the largest cities in Idaho. So just imagine one of the largest cities being abandoned. Imagine where I live in Toronto, I'm going out my door, and it's like, where did everybody go? Well, the town was established in the mid-1800s during the, well, you guys guessed it, the gold and silver rush of the western United States. By the 1880s, the town's population rose to 2,500 people. At its height in the 1880s, it was a gold and silver mining town with a population of around 2,500, and it had approximately 75 businesses. As mining in the area began to die down, so did the city. In 1942, the last mine in the area was closed. Well, you can still visit Silver City, which currently has around 70 buildings, including old churches, a hotel, and it has a lot of old homes that you can see. And finally, in number 1, when it comes to the creepiest place in America, no one can miss Bannock Ghost Town because of its paranormal stories. This old mining town is located near Grasshopper Creek in Montana. The area is famous as a National Historic Landmark and operates as a state park in the US. The photos of this place are wild. Literally, it looks like the quintessential Wild Wild West. To enter Bannock, follow the easiest ways to get there. From Dillon, you can take the interstate highway route to quickly reach your destination. It was famous as a mining town, but then moved towards a visiting place, and gradually the town got empty from the residents before the 1960s. Now visitors come to explore the unlocked buildings.
At number 10, we have Garnet, Montana, USA. If I ever go to Montana, I'm gonna stick to eating steaks and walking around in the mountains. I think I'd rather run into a full-grown grizzly before I would end up in a town filled with ghosts. Well, actually no, if I run into a ghost, the worst thing that would happen is maybe it would scare me so bad I would leave a hot dookie in my fresh jeans. But a grizzly would literally turn me into hot dookie. If you want to run into the ghost of an old miner, this is probably the best place you can go visit. Garnet, Montana was built up during the gold rush, and men from all over the land with bigger dreams than brains would travel here to try and strike it rich, finding some shiny rocks. Well, we all know that eventually the gold rush dried up and Garnet, Montana didn't have much to offer after that. Now it's abandoned unless you count for the various spirits living at the residence. It's said that at certain times of day you can hear a ghost play the piano, which is probably the friendliest thing a spooky ghost can do. Oh, a ghost is like, oh, people are coming. I better play them a good tune so they know I'm not to be trifled with. And it's a hot spot for ghost lovers from all over the world. An average of 16,000 people a year come to check this place out. Someone should take a recording of that ghost piano song so Ariana Grande can mix it up and make a cool Halloween tune over it. At number 9, we have Hashima. Hashima is an island off the coast of Japan that used to be one of the most densely populated places on the planet. In the mid to late 1900s, it's thought that there were over 5,000 people living per square kilometer. The island was a hotspot because of the major underwater coal mine. Nothing like living next to a coal mine to really strengthen your lungs. It was a booming place until 1974 when the coal mine was gone. After that, people started to leave the island in troves. Now the entire place is deserted and there's just a shell of a city. It's almost scary to look at, like it resembles something out of an apocalypse movie. For years it was forbidden for people to visit the island, but now you can do tours in select areas. The ghost stories go deep as well. My favorite is of a little girl dressed all in white who stands on the beach. No one knows what she's looking for, but people think that her family abandoned her on the island because they couldn't afford to raise her. Now her ghost waits on the shore for her family to come back. That is sad. At number 8, we have Butugaychag in Russia. The story of this town is probably the worst fate you could ever meet. Between the years of 1945 and 1955, this place was a labor camp. So if you were arrested back then, they might send you up to this place to work in a mine. Now, what was in this mine? Uranium! And what is uranium? Radioactive. And what do radioactive things do to human cells? Well, they rip them apart and you die one of the most painful deaths imaginable. It's thought that over 400,000 prisoners died at this camp from the terrible conditions. Working in the mine would literally cut your life expectancy down to months. And the land was previously thought to be cursed. When it was originally found by nomadic tribes, the herd of deer died from eating the grass there. We now know that was uranium poisoning. Now it's said that the place is plagued by the thousands of souls who experienced horrible, slow radiation sickness deaths. The town is now shut down, and you could go there if you want to die in a few months, but I would probably stay away. At number 7, we have Bodie, California, USA. When we're talking about ghost towns, you can bet we're gonna cover a lot of places that used to be packed with shiny rocks, especially in America. If you were in the USA back in the 1800s and you weren't trying to dig up a bunch of rocks, then what were you doing? You were a huge nerd. What, did you spend your time trying to figure out a cure for smallpox? Get out of here, you dork! Well, Bodie is a big-time gold rush town. It's estimated in the late 1800s, Bodie was the second largest town in all of California, with around 7,000 people. It really didn't take a lot to be a metropolis back then. You just needed a well, a good saloon, and then you were set. The gold deposit was found by the patriarch of the Bodie family. He didn't get to enjoy his findings though, because he died in a blizzard not long after. His family built the town and then named it after him. It's said that his ghost still haunts the land. Probably because he's so salty he never got to get rich and fat off his findings. You can visit this town. It's known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in all of America. Because of the dry climate, the buildings are in great shape. At number 6, we have Oradour-sur-Glane, France. This ghost town is the site of one of the many horrible acts carried out by the Nazis. In 1944, everyone in the town was forced into buildings by Nazi troops. These buildings were then set on fire, and anyone who tried to run for safety was shot. Out of the several hundred people who lived here, only 7 people survived. How did they do this? Well, they had to cover themselves in the dead bodies of their friends and family. Now the town has never been repaired. It stands as a symbol to remember those who lost their lives in the brutal attacks by the Nazis. And paranormal investigators have visited the site, and they say it's plagued with tormented spirits. If you know anything about World War II history, you know that this isn't even scratching the surface when it comes to the horrific crimes committed by the Nazis. At number 5, we have Pyramida in Russia. This place used to be the most northern coal mine in the world, and even though it's cold as hell there and only 1,000 people live there, it was still an area under constant development. There was a hospital, schools, and a recreation center built for all the people who lived there. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, it was thought that this town would continue to grow and eventually become a winter hotspot. But the mine eventually dried up in the late 90s and everyone had to pack up and take off. The town was completely abandoned until the late 2000s, when tourists started heading up there to bring a little more life to the area. Now there's 20 residents who live there only in the summertime to work at the town's only hotel. This place isn't really high on my lists of must visits. I think I'm gonna hit up Turks and Caicos and get drunk on a beach before I freeze my toes off in a former coal mining town. Also, if you do plan on visiting this winter wonderland, the only hotel in town is said to be haunted. Strange noises can be heard at night, and a tall black figure has been said to walk around the perimeter of the building. At number 4, we have Helltown, Ohio, USA. What a wonderful name. I heard they have an amazing cotton candy store and none of the schools have demons in them. Well, Helltown is a focal point of many conspiracy theories. The land was bought by the government years ago and all the people living there were told to leave. Speculation is this happened because there was a chemical spill and the government didn't want to admit their massive screw up. Now the town is left untouched, but there are rumors that there is a giant mutated beast created by the chemical spill that walks around the area. Not really haunted, but a giant monster's in the same vein. At number 3, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. If you guys are part of the most amazing top 10 family, then you probably know I put this place on a lot of lists, but it's hard to pass it up. Pripyat is the closest city to the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and it's no wonder why it's a ghost town. Turns out people don't like dying an irradiated death. The disaster happened back on April 26, 1986, and it wasn't long after that that everyone started running in the opposite direction. Now vegetation has taken over most of the town, but there are a few residents who have returned. But why is it haunted? Well, there is the Black Crow of Chernobyl, also called the Black Demon, Winged Creature, and many other names. It's said that this thing was seen on the day of the explosion, and some people believe that the demon himself caused the reactor to explode. Now the beast stalks the land, waiting for, I guess, another power plant to be built. I don't know what it wants. At number 2, we have Port Arthur, Tasmania. There are a few places in history that you can call hell on earth, but this is definitely one of them. Port Arthur was once the site of a brutal English prison. The worst criminals in Britain were exiled to this island, and it wasn't anything like getting sent to Club Med. I can promise you there wasn't a mojito in sight. The British government would practice psychological experiments on the inmates, and this was back in the 1800s, so you can only imagine lobotomies and other horrific practices were performed there. The living conditions were so horrible that inmates would kill each other so they could get the death penalty. I mean, you could cut out the middleman and just kill yourself, but to each his own, I guess. Now you can go on tours through the abandoned prison, and I don't think I need to explain to you why this place is haunted. And number 1 on our list is Poveglia, Italy. For our number 1 spot, we've picked a place that has centuries of grotesque history to go along with it. In the mid 12th century, this island was used as a place to dump people who were dying from the plague. Thousands of bodies were burned on this island, and going to the island was non-optional. If it was suspected that you had the Black Death, they sent you, and you stayed there until you suffered to death from this horrible sickness. After all this plagueness was done, it was a pretty chill spot until 1922, when a mental institution was built on the island. It's said that the head doctor would perform terrible experiments on all the people. He later went mad and killed himself. The shell of the institution still stands, and you can go visit it if you want. Also, fun fact about the island, it's said to be very haunted, and there were so many people burned on the island that the soil is 50% human remains. But that's probably just an urban legend, who knows.
Starting off at number 10 are Wichita Falls, Texas. And surprisingly, there are a lot of haunted towns in the state of Texas. There are a lot on this list, and I feel like they probably make the record for most haunted towns in America. But either way, Wichita Falls is filled, and I mean filled, with haunting stories. There's a site in town called the Witch's Gate that used to be a mansion before it burned down in the 70s. After the man of the house died, his wife went a bit insane, turning to things like witchcraft to try and cope. She somehow burned the mansion down, killing her 2 sons with it. Another story claims the sons were robbed, and it was the thief that set the house on fire. The boys haunt the area till this day, and I'm not surprised, I'd be pissed too. Another famous one is the White Sanitarium. Presently a private residence, it used to be a mental hospital in the 20s. After the place closed down, people have seen a group of men sitting around a table playing cards, perhaps the hospital's dead old staff, I don't know. But more famously, they've seen a woman in nurse's clothes roaming the building. There's also Pinky's Cave, which is a 3-mile drainage ditch, and kids used to hang out there years ago, but now it's filled with eerie sounds and homeless people, as well as the ghost of a woman and her child who drowned inside the tunnel during a storm. Coming in at number 9 is Pluckley, Kent. Pluckley is a small village in Kent that was named the most haunted village in England by Guinness World Records in 1989. So I don't want to overhype it, but at the same time it clearly deserves the hype. It's said that 12 to 16 ghosts haunt the village and the surrounding areas. The list includes a screaming man who worked at the village brickworks and fell to his death. Another is a highwayman who was pinned to a tree with a sword. That tree was soon named Fright Corner, and that's where his ghost looms every day. The watercress woman is the ghost of a woman who used to sit on a bridge drinking gin and smoking her pipe while selling watercress. You'd assume she drowned in the river she sat near, but the reality was a lot more grim. It said she dropped gin all over herself and accidentally set herself alight on the bridge. There's also the ghost of a principal who hung himself and was found by his students. On LV Farm, which dates back to 1406, there's the ghost of Edward Brett who shot himself in the dairy. His last words to his wife were, "I will do it," and that's what can be heard whispered around the farm. Then of course, if we're more generic, there's the white lady and the red lady, because make no mistake, there is always a white lady ghost in every list. That's 7 ghosts already, and that's not even the end of it. Based on the deaths in the list, I get the feeling there's like an external force in the village that made people slightly suicidal. That's the vibe I'm getting, I don't really know. At At number 8 we have Savannah, Georgia. Apparently it's widespread knowledge that Savannah is the most haunted city in America, and thankfully I've never been. The town was given this title because literally every building in the town is haunted, like everyone. Every building has a story, every building has its own ghost. It's like Savannah is more for the ghosts than it is for the living. The Hamilton Turner Inn is home to the ghost of a man smoking a cigar on its roof, as well as little children. Whose children are they? God knows. Dubbed one of the best haunted hotels in the US because clearly that's a real category, the Marshall House was a hotel that ended up being used as a hospital thrice in its history, and thus you can imagine all the dead patients as ghosts running around. 1790 Inn and Restaurant is the home of a scorned woman called Anna who haunts the upstairs guest rooms waiting for her lost love. But why is Savannah so haunted? Let's go back in history. The town has been the site of many atrocities. The siege of Savannah that killed 240 people left people thinking unsettled soldiers still lingered there. Savannah has also been the site of a yellow fever epidemic, so that's a lot of people dead just there. In 1820 there was a massive fire in town that destroyed 500 buildings, and there was an even bigger fire 25 years prior that destroyed half that number. The people that died in those fires have been linked to the houses they occupied. And let's not forget the countless murders that have taken place there as well. Filling our number 7 slot is Jerome, Arizona. Mining town Jerome is known as the wickedest town in the West for its brothels, gambling, and heavy drinking miners. The town itself actually burned down 3 times in 3 years at the end of the 1800s. At its peak, its population was 15,000, it then shrank to 50 people in the 50s, and currently it's 450 people. Inside the town, the Jerome Grand Hotel adds to the hauntings tenfold. Before it was a hotel, it was the United Verde Hospital where dozens of people died during the Great Spanish Influenza. Coughs, breathing, lights flicking, doors opening, a little child running on the 3rd floor either laughing or crying, it has it all. Sometimes the little ghost just stays at the foot of a guest's bed and stares at them all night. The sounds of newborn babies crying, and many guests have even spoken to the front desk about it out of concern, but then they find out it's coming from an empty room. A maintenance man named Claude Harvey was found under the elevator murdered in the 30s, and his ghost wanders around the hotel as well. There's even a ghost cat at this hotel. Can you imagine? I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Other than coming for tourism or to chase ghosts, no one really visits Jerome anymore, sadly. Now at number 6 is Helltown, Ohio. Founded in 1806 and formerly called Boston, this place used to be the oldest village in Summit County. Helltown was the victim of disappearing forest land when President Ford let the National Park jurisdiction expropriate land to make parks. The NPS started buying properties of locals in Helltown, and they were pissed. They even wrote "Now we know how the Indians felt" all over their houses, which I feel is a bit inappropriate, but either way, that was all for nothing. The plan fell through in the end and the village was abandoned. Things went wrong in 1985 when rangers visited Kredge Dump nearby and left covered in rashes and sick. Apparently the dump was highly toxic because chemicals were never disposed of properly. There's also the issue of the Satanist church equipped with upside down crosses and all. Human and animal sacrifices even took place there, and that's not all. There was even an escaped mental patient in the woods in the town that killed a bus full of children, and that bus is still there, haunted by the ghost's murdered past. There's even a mutated snake in the town known as the Peninsula Python, so it's safe to say the town lives up to its name and has way too much going on. Coming in at number 5 is Granbury, Texas. This one's a bit of a small one. In 2010 their population wasn't even 8,000, so I mean it's an intimate little town. But regardless of that, it's been the home for many infamous people over the years. Davy Crockett's wife Elizabeth moved there post the Texas Revolution, and Jesse James is even buried in the city of Granbury Cemetery. Billy the Kid apparently moved there too after faking his own death. But the biggest haunted appeal of Granbury is John St. Helen. He moved there in the 1870s to teach and would quote Shakespeare all the time. But people think John St. Helen was actually John Wilkes Booth, the man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Apparently he died died in a bar fire and police threw Booth's body into the Potomac River. Others say he was assigned a new identity after the assassination. I mean, in town he walked with a strange limp and had a southern accent, so people were wary of him. On his deathbed, he did confess to a priest that he was in fact John Wilkes Booth and told him where he could find the gun that killed Abe. But he didn't die that day. He fled the city, but it's said that when he did finally die wherever that was, he came back to Granbury. The Granbury Opera House is haunted by him now, and you can hear him quoting Shakespeare all the time. Some things never change. At number 4 is Galveston, Texas. This island city's residents are so used to seeing ghosts around that honestly, they don't even bat an eyelid anymore. During the early 1900s, the city opened the Galvez Hotel to honor military leader Bernardo de Galvez, and they commissioned a giant portrait of him to go in its lobby. Soon after the Galvez Hotel opened its doors, guests started complaining this painting would make them feel extremely cold and that his eyes would just follow them everywhere. The hotel is also haunted by a ghost bride who's been seen many times in room 501. It's said she hung herself after finding out her fiancé died at sea, but to make matters worse, he didn't even die. He came to the hotel looking for her and for the marriage that would never be. There was also a storm in 1900 which is still considered the deadliest storm in US history that killed 8,000 residents. Mayfield Manor served as a morgue after the storm, and it's now haunted all year round, 24/7, around the clock. Dash Beardsley does ghost tours of the city, and he said he's seen them with his own eyes. Among his many stories is one of an office in town that calls 911 every night. The police have gone there countless times to find the office empty and no telephone even connected. Another story is the ghost of a salesman who died inside Madame Harvey's brothel in the 1800s. A police chief moved his body to a park and made it look like he was, feeding pigeons, and put him on a bench so it would be less embarrassing for his family, and the man's ghost is still looking for his car keys. Filling our number 3 slot is Jefferson, Texas. That's 3 towns in Texas in a row now. I really wasn't lying when I said Texas takes the cake on this list. It's been dubbed one of the most haunted towns in the South by many travel channels, and I know it sounds like I'm saying this is one of the most haunted towns ever for every single number, but it's true. Either way, the town is plagued by the apparitions haunting the Jefferson Hotel and the Excelsior House. Let's start with the hotel. There's a staircase inside which is known to be haunted by a little ghost that likes pulling hair and tapping guests' shoulders. Guests have been locked inside their hotel rooms and bathrooms for ages before being let out, whilst hearing a creepy laughter from the other side of the door. Orbs also appear in photos taken inside the hotel, and all this isn't even scaring me, it's just making me feel annoyed for the guests who have to stay there. Not my problem. Not my problem. Anyway, the Excelsior House is another hotel that's basically just as haunted. It houses a headless ghost on the 2nd floor, so might want to avoid that. And it even houses a woman in black carrying a baby. The ghost apparently even spoke to Steven Spielberg in the 80s, and so she got closer to my dreams of becoming an actor than I have, and she's dead. Great. Now at number 2 is Kerrville, Texas. This town is specifically known for 2 haunted buildings whose ghosts seem to go all around the town all the time. The first is Kerr County Courthouse, where 2 tragedies took place. The first was to do with a couple. The man asked his beloved to marry him and she said no, so naturally in a fit of jealousy and rage he killed her and then hung himself right in front of the courthouse. Talk about unable to deal with rejection. Man up, boy. Both have been seen over 100 times at the courthouse and the surrounding area, just milling about. Honestly, I'd be so mad if I was the girl, honestly. Like I said, I didn't want to marry you, and now I'm stuck in this afterlife purgatory with you. Just my luck. Anyway, the second story involves a prisoner who was killed during a rough interrogation, and he too haunts the inside of the building by banging on the bars and throwing papers about. Now the second building is Delaney Hall in Schreiner University. From its name you can probably guess that it's a dorm building at the university, and it's haunted by 8 former students while living students still reside there. The students see doors slamming when the ghosts have fights with one another, and construction workers constantly complain about how their tools go missing because of the ghosts. And finally, at number 1 is Saratoga, Texas. The Light of Saratoga is the legend of mysterious lights appearing and disappearing on Bragg Road that all residents know. The road runs between Beaumont and Livingston and is next to the ghost town of Bragg Station. A haunted road and a ghost town? What a match made in heaven. So strange lights on roads have been featured in many other videos, so this phenomenon is nothing new. Some think it's simply swamp gas, but the most popular story behind it is that a railroad worker was decapitated during a railway accident, and the light comes from the lantern his ghost carries as he looks for his head. Honestly, if he survived this long without his head, I don't really think he needs it. The second explanation for the lights is a ghostly couple. It said the newlyweds were on their way home on the road when they were stopped by an innocent looking man on the side of the road. However, the man was not innocent at all. He had a gun and a knife and took the man's wife hostage into big thicket forest and killed her there and then disappeared. The man was ordered to wait in the car till they disappeared, otherwise he'd shoot her. He waited and then ran into the forest trying to follow their sounds, but he was too late. So it said the lights on the road are him trying to find his bride's murderer. Love never dies, you guys. Your fiance may be murdered, but your love never dies.
Starting us off at number 10, Bannack, Montana, USA. So Bannack was founded in 1862 when John White discovered gold on Grasshopper Creek. 2 years later, it became the first territorial capital of Montana before it changed to Virginia City. At its peak, it had a population of 10,000 people. You know, quite a bit for back then. But the sheriff was accused by some of leading the ruthless band of road agents called the Innocents. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for the murders of over 100 innocent people, though historical records account for about 8. So it's kind of iffy. The sheriff and 2 deputies were hanged without trial in Bannack in 1864. 22 individuals were accused, informally tried, and hung by the Vigilance Committee, which is the Montana Vigilantes, of Bannack and Virginia City. So the city kept going into the 1930s with a fluctuating population, but then, in the 50s, gold workings dwindled, and then Bannack was declared a state park. The last residents left in the 70s. So all that with the Wild West, and then it's a state park now. Kinda funny. On to number 9, St. Elmo, Colorado, USA. So St. Elmo is the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, and it boasts the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. So it was settled in 1878 as Forest City and officially became St. Elmo in 1880. It was a gold mining settlement, just like many on this list, and the Mary Murphy mine recovered over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. It's just a lot of gold. But it's not a complete ghost town right now since it is privately owned with part-time inhabitants as of right now. You could even say the ghosts there are part-time inhabitants too. The most famous one is Dirty Annie. Her real name was Annabelle Stark, but she got her nickname Dirty Annie after her mother passed away. Annie and her brother were left to run the hotel their mother used to run while their father was in the mines. Since their mother was harsh and strict on cleanliness, after her passing, Annie would walk around in filthy clothing with her hair in a mess as a form of quiet rebellion. But anyways, some people say they have still seen her walking around the town, just strutting her stuff, hair a mess, filthy clothes. And then those who inherited the hotel swear the hotel went cold and all of the doors slammed shut when their grandchildren were playing inside. So could that have been Dirty Annie as well? Just toying with the kids? Number 8, Bodie, California, USA. So this ghost town sprung up after William Bodie hit gold in 1859. Then from 1877 to 1882 it had more than 10,000 residents and produced over 35 million in gold and silver. Also, at one point there were reported to be 65 saloons in town in addition to brothels, gambling halls, and opium dens. Like, it was the Wild West after all, but that's a lot of saloons. But sometimes that mix of money, gold, and alcohol would lead to unexpected fatalities. Newspapers reported that townspeople would ask in the mornings, "Have we a man for breakfast?" I don't know how to do a southern accent. Anyways, that meant, did anyone get killed last night? Because that's just how it was there. But not anymore. Now there are over 200 abandoned wooden buildings in what is Bodie State Historic Park. The buildings are not restored, but preserved. So you can go see a little bit of the Wild West yourself if you want. Number 7, Cerro Gordo, California, USA. So silver was discovered in Buena Vista Peak in 1865. Its discovery brought in miners, but also unsavory characters. At one point, the death rate was 1 person per week. There was no sheriff for miles around, and even the doctor fled the town, scared for his life. Basically, it had a reputation for death. So once Union Mine closed down in 1938, the population also died down. As of right now, there is one resident, Robert de Moraes, who is coincidentally a former miner. He serves as the town's unofficial caretaker. Number 6, Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peake's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it, and the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's Ghost. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It processed nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grand, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out, you know, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected 2 sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlinga, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlinga Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Chisos Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, you know. Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Buddville to Bloodville, literally. Buddville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel. This Canadian hotel is absolutely legendary, but despite the spooky tales, tourism remains as high as as ever. This hotel was built in 1888 in order to encourage tourists and to sell train tickets, and while it certainly did just that, this chateau-style hotel was only the icing on the cake to a trip to the gorgeous Rocky Mountains and all that waits in the Banff National Park. Through the years, though, several guests have had some haunting stories to tell, which included reports of ghost sightings. These ghosts are thought to reside in the hotel, and they include a bride who allegedly fell down the stone staircase during her wedding, which led to her untimely departure, or the legend of Sam the Bellman. This legend has it that Sam worked at the hotel until 1975, and before leaving, he claimed that he would come back to haunt the hotel. It is said that his spirit can be seen in the hotel, helping people with their bags. In our number 9 spot today, we have Zunantunich. This location sits deep in the jungles of Belize, located less than a mile from the border of Guatemala. It has an unbelievably rich history, as it is an ancient Maya ruin that has been abandoned for the last 1,000 years. In 1890, this site had its modern discovery, and since then it has been an important site for archaeology, an amazing tourist attraction, but also it is said to be a hotspot for the paranormal. It is said that the site is haunted by a female ghost. She has black hair and glowing red eyes. Referred to as the Stone Lady, it is said that she was first spotted by one of the first research teams in the area in 1893, and since then she has been frequently seen by the tallest building complex called El Castillo. No one exactly knows the story behind the Stone Lady considering the history of this site, but many believe she may have been a part of a ritual sacrifice, which was a tradition and spiritual practice done by the ancient Maya civilization. In our number 8 spot today, we have Burg Eltz. This German castle dates back to 1157, so it's no surprise that there are many myths and legends surrounding it. The most common tale is that of a young countess named Agnes. Agnes was betrothed or promised to another noble, but after meeting him, she called off their future wedding. Apparently this guy was the worst, and also even if he wasn't, no one could really blame her for calling off a wedding she didn't want to have. But of course, things quickly went awry. This noble guy was mad that she had rejected him, so the scorned lover laid siege to the castle. Agnes fought to defend her home, but she passed away during the battle. That is the story behind why her spirit is said to haunt the Burg Eltz castle. Many say the strongest presence is felt in her former bedroom. It is said that her spirit is quite mournful, and apparently her battle armor and axe remain on display as well. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Eden Brown Estate. This estate is located in Nevis, which is the smaller of the 2 islands that comprise the nation of St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. It is said that despite having just as much to offer, Nevis is often overshadowed by St. Kitts. That is, until people hear of this ghostly haunting. Eden Brown Estate is a former plantation that now lies in ruin. The estate was once owned by a businessman who was going to give the property to his daughter as a wedding present. Legend goes that on the wedding day there was a very mysterious duel between the groom and his best man that ended up leaving both of the men dead. Because of this tragic happening on what should have been her wedding day, the businessman's daughter remained unmarried and alone for the rest of her life, which meant that when she passed, there was no one to leave the estate to. Now visitors of the estate report seeing the spirit of a reclusive woman as she roams about the grounds. Aside from this story, who knows what other kind of horrors and absolute tragedies that this place has seen. In our number 6 spot today, we have Bangar Fort. Bangar Fort is located in India, just 100 miles southwest of Delhi. This place is pretty much completely abandoned, as it is said to have had a curse placed on it. Apparently many years ago, a sorcerer tried to woo a local princess, in which she rejected him. He got so upset that he decided that cursing this town was his only course of action. I just have to mention that none of these are a normal reaction to being rejected, and calling it an overreaction would honestly be an understatement. This fort now is closed to visitors after sundown because of all the spooky happenings that go on here. This fort is extremely beautiful, so it's no wonder the paranormal doesn't keep people out. People have reported having extremely strong feelings of an otherworldly presence, and even some have reported hearing voices that are seemingly coming from nowhere. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Whaley House. The Whaley House is located in San Diego and it was built in 1857. The site that this family house was built on was actually the location of San Diego's first public gallows, so as you can imagine, that's a pretty good backstory for a haunted site. Right after moving in, Thomas Whaley reported that he could hear the footsteps of Yankee Jim Robinson, who had been hanged at the gallows just 4 short years before the house was built. After moving in, the Whaley family began to experience a bunch of family tragedies, many of which actually happened inside of the house. The Whaley house is now a museum, and apparently the family members continue to haunt the site. These paranormal occurrences are apparently often accompanied by the smells of cigar smoke and heavy perfumes. In our number 4 spot today, we have Obvodny Canal. Obvodny Canal is located in St. Petersburg, Russia, and this whole thing just really creeps me out. This man-made canal was built in the late 18th century, and ever since then there has been extremely strange occurrences at this location. Construction workers would complain of headaches. They would also sometimes even have random outbursts of violent behavior that was uncharacteristic of them. But the craziest, most unsettling part is what has given this location full cursed status. Many of these people have attempted to take their own lives. Sadly, most of the attempts were successful, but the few people who have been saved have explained that they have no idea why they did it. They say that they didn't really have intentions beforehand, and some have even said that they felt some sort of invisible force pulling them into the water. Apparently there are some sinister souls that live beneath the surface of the water, and there have even been reports of seeing a lady in white in the water before she suddenly disappears. Long story short, remind me to just never ever go here. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary is located in Philadelphia, and of course it used to be a prison, but it is now an abandoned and extremely haunted house. This prison used to house some pretty big profile prisoners such as Al Capone and Willie Sutton, but it was different from the American prisons we are used to now. This is because this prison was entirely separate incarceration. The inmates would live, sleep, eat, and everything else alone. When they were removed from their cells, they would have hoods placed over their heads as well. Considering all we now know about how detrimental isolation is, this of course must have taken an immense toll on the prisoners. Beside this, there were also some pretty gruesome and horrible punishments in this prison, such as having prisoners' tongues chained to their wrists. I'm honestly not even sure how you would do that, but apparently it was a thing. This prison now sees thousands of voluntary visitors every year, and there have been plenty of reports of some creepy paranormal happenings. These reports include seeing shadowy figures, hearing creepy laughter that doesn't belong to anyone living, and hearing footsteps throughout the prison. I feel like considering all that went on when this prison was active, it truly does make sense that this building would be a haunted one. In our number 2 spot today, we have Raynham Hall. Raynham Hall is located in England and was built around 1620, and it is a large building on 7,000 acres, which is obviously quite impressive. The tale that follows this haunted building is that of Lady Dorothy Dolly Townsend and her husband Viscount Turnip Townsend. I can't believe a couple with the nicknames Dolly and Turnip have an evil history, but unfortunately, they do. The story goes that Turnip kept Dolly locked up in the house, which is obviously just terrible and very cruel. After her passing, it's no wonder she decided to stick around and haunt the house. Apparently, there was a photo taken of her ghost in 1930, and it is said that no one has ever been able to prove it was a fake, so all you photo experts out there, take a look and let me know what you think. A lot of the places on this list now serve as haunted houses, but apparently this one is still lived in by the Raynham family. Hence the name. In our number 1 spot today, we have Forsyth Park. One thing I didn't know is that apparently the entire city of Savannah, Georgia is a pretty haunted place due to the creepy tunnels that are located underneath the city. But one of the most notable, highly haunted places within the city is Forsyth Park. Apparently there used to be a hospital across the street, and there would be autopsies performed in the tunnels below the park. I personally feel like autopsies are already creepy enough, so I'm not sure if conducting them in an underground tunnel was exceptionally necessary, but hey, I can't change the past. Because of this scary practice, the park has seen a lot of paranormal activity since these days, and it usually is the sort of place where 1 second you'll see a strange figure, but as soon as you blink or look away, it disappears just as quickly as it suddenly appeared.
Coming in at number 10, we have the unreachable town of Urkhammer. Is this a true story? If so, well, I'm scared. It seems like there did indeed used to be a town by the name name of Urkhammer in Iowa in the early 1900s. It was a farming town with a relatively small population. However, it was noted in the mid-1900s that it had been entirely abandoned, and nobody knows why. That isn't even the scary bit either. There is a worrying story associated with the town. Whether or not it's true or false, I simply don't know, but, well, have a listen. A tourist passed through the town in the early 1950s and bought some gas at a gas station. As he drove out of town, he realised his gas tower was still on empty. Sure enough, he'd been ripped off. He turned around to confront the station workers, but he never seemed to reach the town. He was sure that he'd only been driving for 5 minutes, but after turning around for 10 minutes, he actually never made it back. Soon he ran out of gas and decided to continue back into town on foot. It was his only option really, didn't have any gas. He kept walking and saw the town in the distance, but he could never reach it. Eventually he was picked up by a passing car who said that they had not driven through a town for hours. Weird. Coming in at number 9 we have Luto Katuto. Sounds fake. In March 2018, a major landslide led to the destruction of over 100 houses, wiping away the small town of Luto Katuto overnight. Have a look at the damage. The landslide has led to Luto Katuto being dubbed the town that the earth swallowed, and it's easy to see why. Now, the cracks began appearing around 10 years before the major landslide in March 2018, but the government simply told the town residents to fill it with dirt. Town resident Giorgio Abeja spoke to the press and said that a loud noise woke him up in the night. The town was sinking. Luckily, he was able to escape with his life. The town should never have been built on the clay ground, as it was always vulnerable to landslides. Sadly, 106 families were displaced as a result of the sinking. Another town swallowed whole at number 8, we have Bayou Corny. The controversial case of Bayou Corny sinkhole has been settled with the Texas Brine Company at fault. In 2012, the town of Bayou Corny was evacuated when bubbles began rising in nearby water and there was increased seismic activity in the earth. Tim Murphy, a journalist for The Atlantic, said that Bayou Corny is the biggest ongoing industrial disaster in the United States that you haven't heard of. For some reason, nobody really talks about it. 350 residents have been turfed out of their home because their town is sinking before their very eyes. The disappearance of this town led to it being dubbed as Demon Alley. Coming into number 7, we have the New City Complex. The New City Complex was built in West Milford, New Jersey. The town was located along Route 32 and was built by the City of Newark Water and Reservoir Plant in order to provide housing for plant workers. Located along Route 23, the town is now entirely abandoned and nobody knows why, although of course there are theories. It is said that the town pretty much dissolved overnight in 1992. Rumour has it that the seeming exodus happened after a dodgy person moved to the town in the late 1980s. Others say that the town was never a town at all, just a set of a movie which has been left to crumble. So, is it an inexplicably abandoned town or an urban legend? Coming into number 6, we have the Roanoke. What happened to the people of Roanoke? It is a question still baffling us 430 years later, as it seems that not one but 2 occasions the town actually totally disappeared. Twice! Let me start from the beginning. In 1585, a small group of settlers made Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina their home, although many left when they found the conditions to be unsatisfactory. In 1587, 115 English settlers came to join those who had left, but weirdly they found no one. Like, absolutely no one. Weirdly though, they didn't seem to be too disturbed by that, assuming they must have just upped and left because they didn't like it. At the time, the colony decided to send their governor, a John White, back to England to gather fresh supplies and fresh settlers to expand the colony. He went back and then 3 years later he returned with his supplies to the colony. He'd left his wife and daughter there. He was expecting a big reunion, but once again, he found no traces of the inhabitants, just like the time the settlers had arrived, only this time he knew something was wrong because his family wouldn't have upped and left without telling him. The only clue he found was the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post, which is extremely strange. So where did the settlers of the Roanoke go? They were absolutely never seen again. Now, some theorists say that they were killed by a Native American tribe, although the fact that there was no trace of their bodies is absolutely suspicious. Others say that they decided to sail back to England for some reason or another but got lost at sea, but again, I'm saying this town disappeared twice, so there really has to be something else going on. Coming into number 5, we have Christmas, Arizona. I love a good abandoned town, I really do. I went to Calico in California back in December 2017 and it was so interesting and spooky, but now I really want to visit this town even more. Meet the lost town of Santa Claus in Arizona. Santa Claus! The town was so popular with Christmas lovers despite its untraditional setting in the desert. The town was founded in 1937 and created as a Christmas resort, just, you know, cause. A Swiss chalet, and no I don't mean the chicken place, a Swiss themed house is what I mean, and plenty of Christmas trees, a life-size dollhouse, a Christmas themed inn. Basically kids could sit on Santa's lap all year round and they loved it. Until they didn't. Just stopped being a town. It's now abandoned by the side of the road. Instead of Christmas pies and elves, all you'll find these days are rattlesnakes, and while I love the sound of this, at the same time I feel like it would have sucked for the employees. I once worked as an elf in a toy store and I felt like I had too much Christmas, so the actual day was a bit of a letdown, so imagine that being all year. To be honest, I'm actually thinking maybe Santa Claus in Arizona is better off disappeared. Coming into number 4, we have Petra. Petra is located in southern Jordan in the Middle East and was settled in the early 9000 BCE. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra was carved into the rock, but after the Roman Empire took over the city, it started to disappear. At first, the population diminished in around the 7th and 8th centuries. Then the city became abandoned for centuries, with very little footfall due to its remote location. Petra lay forgotten and all but disappeared as a result of natural disasters and neglect. It was off the map for a very long time until Swiss explorers rediscovered the city in 1812. As stories dribbled back to Europe of a lost town, intrigue grew. Local folklore claimed that the city has been created by the wand of Moses, having actually lost touch with the actual history of the forgotten city. In 1929, archaeologists led an excavation of the city. In 2016, even more of the city was discovered buried in the sands. Coming into number 3, we have the cities of the Amazon. When the dastardly colonists invaded swathes of the world, they brought back stories when they returned to their homelands. The Spanish returned home to regale stories of vast cities made of gold and filled with treasure along the Amazon. Some called it the City of Zed, others called it El Dorado. This led hungry explorers to seek out the cities, only when they got there, they never found them. Ever. All they found was thick jungle. The golden cities that early pioneers had spoken of became nothing but myth and legend. That was until recently. In 2010, aerial images taken by National Geographic revealed earthworks spanning 155 miles in the Amazon. As Amazonian rainforests have been cleared for agriculture, further evidence of ancient pre-Columbian movements have been found. So speaking of the somewhat mythical, we have Atlantis at number 2. So bearing in mind that a lot of people believe that the Amazonian cities were a myth, but now it's looking like they may well have been legit, what do we think the deal with Atlantis is? It's enduring, I'll say that. Atlantis is a legendary city that is mentioned in a number of pieces of ancient Greek literature, including by the late great philosopher Plato. It is said that Atlantis was a thriving city filled with affluence and positivity. That was until it sank. Atlantis was said to have sunk in the sea in a single day and night. There's been a lot of speculation as to where that city may be. People have searched the Straits of Gibraltar between Africa and Spain and found nothing as of yet. If Atlantis was real, it would be over 11,000 years old according to our calculations. I actually do kind of have a feeling that we may one day find this lost city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Langville, Montana. This is actually utterly creepy. It really has freaked me out. I was doing some heavy research into disappeared places and towns and spaces, and Google autocomplete kept suggesting Langville, Montana disappearance. Now, it would appear at the bottom in related searches too, as would Langville, Montana incident or Langville, Montana turned inside out, which is some Stranger Things stuff if I've ever heard of it. Oddly, when I clicked the link or even searched it up in the search bar, the internet yielded absolutely no information. Not a sausage. To me, this makes things even weirder, right? Why am I being suggested a mystery town when there's no evidence of it? I'm thinking that not only did this town disappear, but its data was also expunged from the internet. Why? I love a good cover-up theory, and let me make it even better with some investigative journalism. Here is the Google trend page for Langville, Montana disappeared. As you can see, it was actually frequently searched for in July and August 2018, then a few times after. Here I've compared it to searches for me, my name. I'm not saying people Google me a lot, but I am a real person on a channel with a lot of subscribers, so it does happen. So there was a time when Langville, Montana was being Googled loads, like super loads. Again, I'm just saying, why is there no record if people are Googling it? Questions, we need answers. Coming in at number 10, we have Audley's Town. Historians are baffled by the lost County Down Irish village of Audley's Town. The town was run by landowner, the then Lord of the Land Viscount Bangor, who lived in the town's manor, Castlewood. When he died, his wife remarried and evicted all of the townsfolk. She then sent them off on a boat called the Rose, and they were told to set sail to Boston. The Rose left in 1852, but the boat never arrived in the New World. Some say that Lady Bangor's new husband, Major Savage Nugent, hated the townfolk and had them killed. These days the town is covered over by woodland, and part of the disappeared town was used as a setting for Game of Thrones. Coming into number 9, we have the trenches. This is so sad. During World War I, Europe kinda lost it. I say kind of, like it literally did. Countries turned on one another and fought a bloody battle to the death. On one side was Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Canada, and eventually Japan and the United States. On the other was Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. From October 1914 to March 1918, neither side made much ground and were stuck in a deadlock battle fought in trenches along the western front of France. It is thought that the total length of the trenches was around 2,490 kilometers. Not only did millions of people die in the trenches, they lived in them too. They were forced to live in squalid conditions. Millions and millions of men. For all intent and purpose, these long thin trenches were towns. Then, as the war was over, the trenches were abandoned, leaving a history of bloodshed and violence in the ground. This is what they looked like over 100 years ago, and now this is what they look like today. This is the battlefield from Beaumont-Hamel in France, a notable fighting spot in the Battle of the Somme. Haunting. Coming into number 8 is Calico. Here is a picture of me at Calico Ghost Town in California. I stumbled across the place on Christmas Eve in 2017. It was a very interesting time of life for me then, and coming across a ghost town seemed to kind of fit with that weird and intense era. So Calico was an old silver mining town in the San Bernardino mountain range. The town was a flash in the pan of the silver rush era and was abandoned in 1907, with a brief return in 1915 when a cyanide plant was built to try and restore economic fortune. Sadly for Calico, it was to no avail. The town is undoubtedly mysterious and spooky, up in the mountains and in the middle of the desert, which is pretty remote. It is also said that the town is haunted by not one but 5 ghosts. There's a little girl ghost who only appears to children. There's also a ghost named Tumbleweed Harris, the lady in a white gown who wanders the outskirts of town, an angry cowboy, and the ghost of a dog named Dorsey. Coming into number 7, we have the Library of Alexandria. Alexandria is a coastal city in Egypt, sitting at the south of the Mediterranean Sea. The city dates back to 331 BC and was once the thriving capital of Egypt, but was reduced to nothing more than a small fishing village in the late Ottoman period. Brutal ransackings and an earthquake destroyed a lot of the original ancient landmarks, including the Alexandria Lighthouse and Cleopatra's tomb, which has notably never been found. Most notably, however, was the biggest loss suffered by the city, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Now, this was a massive library, so big that it was hailed as the most significant in the ancient world. It was said to contain the equivalent of 100,000 books, which in the early days of the written word was a lot. It's uncertain who destroyed the library, just that it's no longer there. Julius Caesar's been blamed, but so have many people who ransacked the city over its history. Moreover, while the city has been discussed a lot in literature, we don't know for sure if it ever really existed. Alexandria as a city was rebuilt eventually, and a city of the same name stands in its place, but the original landmark is by and large lost to the ground in the ocean, taking many of the secrets of the ancient world with it. Another ancient one up for you next. At number 6, we have have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, the Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They've been described as some of the most fantastical roof gardens of all time and were thought to have been located in Babylonia in Iraq. The gardens were believed to have been destroyed sometime after the 1st century AD, and many archaeologists have spent their lives looking for their remains. The existence is not confirmed by archaeological findings, and there have been suggestions that the gardens are mythical. That being said, they were thought to be in Iraq, and much of the country has been super ravaged by war over the years. Okay, I have to deviate from this video for a second to ask if anyone else remembers the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in Bill and Ted, because I absolutely swear that there was a Babylon bit, but I can't find it anywhere online, and rather like the gardens themselves, I'm thinking, are they mythical, or is this like a Mandela effect thing that I've just discovered? Let me know. Coming into number 5, we have Tyneham. Tyneham in England is a pretty spooky village indeed. The ghost village in South Dorset was abandoned in 1943 at the height of World War II. It was abandoned for fear of bombardment from the German forces. 225 villagers were rehomed, all of which thought that they would return after the war, but mysteriously the British government purchased the land and kept it for military training. The village is now opened at various times of the year for controlled tourism, but those who have been lucky enough to visit claim that it's very spooky indeed. In fact, some even claim that the village telephone rings even though it's disconnected from wires. The village was featured in a television show, Mysteries of the Abandoned, and this is what was said by visitors.
The village pond looks like any other village pond in England, except there's no wildlife there. There are no ducks. It's eerily empty.
Shut the front door! No ducks on the pond! Must be cursed, right? I have to say that the documentary is super dramatic and I kinda love it. They claim that it's eerie and that the church remains as it was in the 40s. Have a listen to this. I'm very, very here for the dramatic music.
At a darker narrative. Like the cottages, which are little more than empty shells.
And these are in an unusual state of disrepair.
Da da da! But where are the ducks? Questions. Coming in at number 4, we have the lost villages of the St. Lawrence. Controversially, in 1958, 9 villages were flooded along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. Now, this was to make way for the St. Lawrence Seaway. The project was unpopular as 6,500 people were displaced, and of those people, the residents believed that the money that they got for their homes wasn't enough because the plans had already depressed property value. The villages were all in Ontario and are now under the water in the St. Lawrence River. Some of the areas are now popular scuba diving spots. Eerily though, it is possible to spot the outlines of the villages from the water when levels are low. Another sunken city at number 3, we have the withered city of Villa Epicuan. Villa Epicuan was a popular tourist resort near Buenos Aires, Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, which meant that hopes and livelihoods had to be abandoned in the water. Can you imagine? Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuan became a sunken town. However, weirdly, the waters began to recede in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time it was totally white, stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time underwater and away from the sun, and now they're white too, and the whole thing just looks ghostly and twisted and withered. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the bank. Honestly, it looks so scary to me, but I also kinda love it. This town or city, more like, still exists but may not in our lifetime, so I want to give you a little warning at number 2. We have Venice. Venice is sinking. The historic town is made from 118 small islands connected by bridges and dates back to the 10th century BCE. The issue is here climate change and tourism. Cruise ships are turning up in the harbour, which disturbs the waters. Thousands of passengers disembark from the ships and trample the city, rarely without buying anything, and contributing to the economy that could actually help save the city. The old buildings of Venice don't have stable foundations and they're gradually subsiding into the waters of the lagoon. Marry that with tourism and overcrowding and the rise in ocean levels in general, and it seems very much on the brink. It would be devastating to lose this city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Happy Valley. Happy Valley is not a happy place to be. The town used to be known as Williamstown and is located between Syracuse and Camden in upstate New York. York. Founded in 1850, the town was a farming community, but it was abandoned in the Great Depression. That being said, the Depression probably wasn't the reason people left, if the rumors are to be believed anyway. It is said that the men of Williamstown angered a witch that lived on the fringes of the community. How they angered her? Well, some say they taunted her, others say they abused her. Either way, in a fit of rage, the town was suddenly struck with plague that killed a whole chunk of the population. On top of that, crops began failing. Today, those in surviving towns near Happy Valley claim that actually it is haunted and they will not venture into the abandoned spot.